So hello everyone and welcome to First Fridays, a webinar series about the business of being a spiritual writer. These informal conversations take place on the first Friday of every month. Today our guest is our good friend Margot Starbuck. Margot is the author of several award-winning books, including The Girl in the Orange Dress and Not Who I Imagine. And she has ghostwritten several more books, which I think we'd all love to hear more about. She's a speaker, consultant, freelance editor, as well as just an absolutely wonderful person. Margot is a member of our Writer Support Services program, where she evaluates book proposals and offers editorial services. She has been a featured speaker at several of our conferences and will be once again at our upcoming Writing for Your Life conference in Charlotte this March. So welcome, Margot.
Thank you. Fun to be with y'all today.
All right. So, Margot, I've described some of your previous work. Can you tell us what new projects that you're working on?
Yeah. I'm usually juggling a few things, and right now I am, to the delight of my teenagers, working on a book about marijuana with a psychiatrist. So we're looking at what we do and don't know about both medicinal marijuana and recreational marijuana. So super fun. And I am also working with a fabulous young woman. She was born with disabilities, and for 21 years, she did not have a way to communicate. And she had this great family, and they gave her all these different possibilities, but she couldn't communicate. When she was 21, a doctor saw her and said, I think she has literacy skills. And at that age, Holly learned to type and communicate, and she'd been paying attention in school. She knew how to read, she knew how to spell. And so believe me, she has a fabulous story to tell. And also I finished my own book, and it's been a while since I did my own. And this one is called The Grown Woman's Guide to Online Dating. I hate that I'm an expert, but I am. And that will come out in August. It was super fun to write, and I'm excited about it.
I knew you were working on that one. I'm looking forward to it. So, please, let me know when we get closer in terms of how I can help you launch that.
Thank you.
I want to, help get the word out about anything that you do. So, as I mentioned earlier, you've done a lot of ghostwriting, and I know you can't name names, but can you talk just generically for a moment about some of the different types of people who you've worked with in that capacity?
Yeah. And I'm trying to think. I feel like there's very few that I can't name, and it's handled differently in terms of how like secret or public. But a lot of times, like if my name's not on the front, it will appear on the title page. But a typical way those projects happen is that a publisher will kind of secure a client who has a great story. So that could be country music singer or NFL player who won Dancing with the Stars, Olympic gold medalist in running. And then they just kind of think, who might be a good fit for working with this author. And I love it when they think of Margot. It's the best job ever. And it feels like such a holy privilege to be with someone in the unpacking of their story. And I'm thinking of stories of addiction and murder, and a man becoming friends with the man who murdered his father. Like, it is so holy, and just feels like such a gift to get to be with people in their stories in that way.
That has to be such an interesting set of experiences.
Yeah, it really is. At the end of my life, that will make its own fascinating book.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's get down to talking about the business of being a spiritual writer. And let's first talk about making a living as a writer. Most of the writers do things besides just write. In addition to income from book royalties, I know you do a great deal of other things. Ghostwriting we've talked about. You do editing services. You do speaking. Can we talk about, kind of how that works out for you without naming any numbers or anything like that?
No. Sure. And I forget that not every writer actually does have the privilege of just writing. And I don't take that for granted. Like, it does feel like a good gift, but you've really nailed it when you talk about all these different streams. Because I don't think I do know anyone who has just one stream of writing income. There have to be lots of streams. And so when my marriage ended 6 or 7 years ago, I had written my own books, but suddenly I had to up my game. And so I talked to one of the publishers I had worked with, and I asked if I could be a proofreader. I do not think I was a great proofreader. It was not life-giving. But then I began to do more collaborating and editing. And so, yeah, for me, royalties have been just the teeniest trickle in all the streams. But yeah, book advances is one. Ghostwriting, collaborating, and my speaking is both speaking about writing and speaking at spiritual retreats, both of those things. I do editing and consulting for my own clients. I work with Writing for Your Life. I work alongside publishers. And again, there's nothing really systematic of that. It's just when they have a project, hopefully they think, ooh, Margot might be good on this one. And one thing that's new for me that I'm starting to do is to produce resources like webinars and kind of other coaching tools to serve writers. So lots and lots of different streams of income to make a living as a writer.
Well, good for you. I mean, you're very creative and entrepreneurial and great to work with, so I can imagine that there are a lot of folks, whether they're a publishing house or author or whoever, that, enjoy working with you.
Mm.
But I think, kind of one of the things I think I've heard is that your relationships with publishing houses are very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and nobody ever told me that. I had to kind of learn it on my own. But yeah, I would want writers to hear that. And those relationships for me have always been nurtured at writing conferences. Like, that's publishers, their inboxes are overloaded. And even if it's just 5 minutes at a conference, that's where you can really get face-to-face and begin to build and develop those relationships, which are kind of everything. And nobody told me that, but it is something that I want writers to hear because it really is important.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about agents. Can you talk about your experience there and what suggestions you have for authors in that regard?
Yeah. So my kind of writing work began when I attended the Festival of Faith and Writing in 2006. And what I got real focused on after that was writing a book proposal, pitching to publishers. That's what I had in my mind. And then about a year later, I got a scholarship to go to a different writers conference, and it was smaller, and that's where I noticed agents for the first time. I had just never considered agents, but I went to a session that one agent gave where he talked about the type of writer that he wanted to work with, and I kind of, something clicked, and I realized, oh yeah, agents are the win, and I sidled up to an agent during that conference, and they had appointments. But of course, I hadn't signed up for an appointment to talk with an agent, but I sidled up to him and was trying to dazzle him. And he just pointed to like a stage with book tables on it. And he said, "That's your agent." And he was talking about Greg Johnson, who actually did become my agent. So I don't know how this guy knew that, but it has been a good fit. And I do want writers to hear 3 things about agents. And that is, first, they have done the work of building relationships with publishers. And so when a publisher receives a proposal from an agent, they are going to give it a little closer attention because it makes their life easier because it has already been vetted. So an agent isn't going to risk their reputation and relationships sending a proposal that's not ready for publication. So editors at publishing houses know that when they receive something from an agent, it's probably going to be pretty strong. So the relationships that agents have built. And the second thing is that they're savvy at negotiating advances, royalties. And often there's not a lot of flexibility with those, but That's their area of expertise. And then finally, if anything does go wrong in a publishing relationship, so if I were to turn something in and the publisher said it's horrible, we won't take it, or if something happened in my life and I couldn't complete a manuscript, the agent becomes your advocate with the publisher. So they can be the bad cop, and hopefully you can stay good cop. So I really encourage writers who are seeking publication to consider looking for an agent. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. That was all very helpful. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
So you've worked with several different publishing houses, both in the context of ghostwriting as well as, your own books and probably other, dimensions as well. What do you recommend in terms of managing those different relationships, and what juggling you might have to do in that regard?
Yeah, Brian, I feel like I am the best person to ask this question, so thank you. And the reason is because I screwed it up. I'm trying to think how many years ago. I don't know, maybe 6 years ago. And what that means is I had been with a publisher for several books, and then I got it in my mind, I want a bigger publisher. And there's not a better publisher than this one, but I thought, I want to go bigger. Maybe they can sell more books. And when I looked at other writers and my writing friends, I could see that that's what they had done. They started with this one, and then they moved to this publishing house and this one. So I just naively thought, okay, that's just what you do. But I really failed relationally because we didn't even send my fourth proposal to that publisher who I actually adored, and they had been so good to me, and we had this great relationship. And thinking back, it was such a bad idea, and those relationships were bruised and then repaired, and so grateful to have a good relationship with them now. But I just messed it up. So what I would love for writers to hear is that, people do publish with different publishers, but it still always is going to boil down to relationships and not to who you think can sell the most books. So I know lots of writers who do have good relationships with different publishers, and I think that is me now, but I learned the hard way. Yeah.
Well, it's a small community too, right?
Yeah.
They all talk to each other. They all know each other. So that's one of the aspects of this whole thing that's been interesting to me is that, kind of the Christian spiritual publishing arena, whether you're talking about authors or agents or the publishing house folks, it really isn't a huge group.
Yeah.
And, like I said, they all know each other and talk to each other. So you
Yeah.
don't want to burn bridges.
That's right. That's right. And one more thing that I want for writers to hear. Now, this isn't like if you're pitching your own book, but if you're somebody like me who wants to do maybe editing work, coaching work, and you're kind of nurturing your relationship with a publisher, what I want you to do, and one of the things I'm passionate about actually is seeing more people of color being able to use their gifts in the industry. And that's pretty much about making, you're talking about an industry that's like this, and it's this network, and it's about networking with people that we might not yet know. And what I want folks who maybe aren't in the network yet to hear is that you want to make it really easy for a publisher to hire you, whether it's proofreading, developmental edit, whatever it is. I want you to make it as easy as possible for them. And so the way that you do that is by showing them in just the most efficient communication. Maybe it's a CV, maybe it's one page on your website where you can show them the work that you've done, and hopefully that includes editing some books, and if you have any endorsements from clients. And I really think you can get those. That's not that big of a deal. When you do even a small job for someone, say you're not paid, but they send you an email back saying, this process was great, I loved working with you, put that on your website. And because editors and publishers are so overwhelmed with information, you make it as easy as possible for them to say yes to you. Don't make it complicated. Don't use too many words. Again, whether it's the CV, an efficient email, one page on your website, show them what you've done. And I'd also suggest that it's okay to do some work for free at the beginning so that you can get some of those projects under your belt. Because there has to be a first one. So if it's somebody who's self-publishing and you can edit their book either for free or on the cheap, that's great experience that you can then show an editor that you have. Yeah.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. And said, you've been around the block, it's this whole thing, as you said, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like you're really a great fount of wisdom for folks that have much less experience in this space.
Thank you. Thanks.
So I should have mentioned earlier, many of the folks are going to be watching this on a recorded basis, but there are some folks that are live with us on Zoom. So if any of you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat box, and we'll try to get to them at some point during the webinar here. So anyway, Margot, you do freelance editing and you've worked with editors. So can you describe kind of a little bit about the nuts and bolts of your interactions with editors when you do books, either your own books or ghost-written books?
Yeah, right, because those are two very different things. So let's say when I'm writing and submitting my work to get feedback from an editor, I'm such a nerd. I love it and I treasure it. And I know that some people don't want any of their words changed, but I am not that person. So I love having that fresh set of eyes and just any feedback they can give me. And those experiences have been different. So some editors will have a light hand and they might say, we don't need this chapter, but the rest of it is pretty strong. And then others will have a heavier hand. Now I'm trying to decide if I'm a light-handed or a heavy-handed editor. I do make a lot of comments. And again, usually the editor's posture is, here's a lot of things to think about, questions, concerns. And then ultimately it is up to the writer which ones you accept, which ones you, kind of find creative solutions for. I love that process. And my book is always better because of it. And then the other piece is, let's say a busy acquisitions editor has hired me to edit the manuscript of their client. The thing I really want to do is to get that editor's vision for the book, because they've read the manuscript. And if they can tell me what they hope to see and what they think will be the best for that writer, then I can kind of facilitate that. So on a recent project, the editor told me, she has this powerful story. It's all at the beginning. This book is going to be stronger if that story can be woven throughout the whole book. And then that was kind of the heart of our work together. And the author loved that process. I loved it. Really, we all know it made the book so much stronger, but that wasn't just what I was bringing to it. That's what the acquisitions editor wanted to see in the book. And so it was a fun process. So really trying to learn what it is that they want to see, and then you become the person to execute that with the author.
Cool. So just a little bit of an off-the-wall kind of a question. Have you ever considered self-publishing a book? I mean, maybe you're too busy doing all this other work that you haven't, but I'm just curious.
Brian, I have so many opinions on this. And I'll bet you don't even know. I have self-published one book, and I'll tell you, I had it in my heart to do a 365-day devotional about, when I was going through a hard time in my life, a really helpful book was Henry Nouwen's The Inner Voice of Love. And it kind of helped me think theologically, and I began writing sort of in a similar style. I really just flattered myself there to say that I wrote in a style similar to Henry Nouwen. But I had this material in my heart. I loved it. We pitched it to a few places. And honestly, I just didn't have the platform to be able to sell a book like that. And so, publishers didn't snatch it up. And it meant so much to me. I said, I'm going to self-publish this. And what I always tell writers is, when you self-publish, you become responsible for selling every copy of that book. And so don't do it if you don't have a plan. I did not have a plan at all. I love the creating. I have always hated the selling part. And, now that it exists, I can be smarter, and there's some strategies and things I can do. But I have not done a great job at selling it. And so So that's the first thing that I want writers to hear is when you self-publish, every single copy of that book, essentially you become responsible for selling. And the other thing that I want writers to hear is readers have been trained to expect excellence. So when you read a book from Tyndale House, Thomas Nelson, you will not find an error on the first page in the first chapter. I guess there's always a chance, right, that there's going to be a little tweak and error someplace in the book. But readers have been trained to expect excellence. And if you self-publish and have either a misspelling, a grammar error, I mean, something as ridiculous as, as 3 spaces after a period, readers notice this. And when they find it, they lose confidence in the book and they put it down. So what's important for me to tell writers who are self-publishing is I want them to be able to see the process that a book goes through in traditional publishing. And that is the writer takes maybe 6 to 12 months to write it. And then it gets a big developmental edit and they send back their changes. And there's a possibility that there's another round of edit and changes. And then it goes to a copy editor. And then, probably one copy editor, but then there's proofreader after proofreader after proofreader. So many different people have their eyes on this manuscript. And okay, so those are just the words, but there are covers. Readers expect beautiful covers, and it's so important. There's the interior design of the book. So all of these, for somebody who's self-publishing, are expenses, and I just wouldn't want writers to try to cut corners because it really causes the reader to lose confidence. And honestly, if you have a bad cover, it really is going to impact the sales of that book. So if somebody chooses to self-publish, 2 things I want them to know. 1, you need to have a plan of how you're going to market and sell that book. And then the second is strive for excellence because it's what readers expect and it's really important.
What wonderful advice. Wonderful advice. Thank you. So let's get on to the nasty platform word that everyone hates. That whole arena has changed dramatically, right, since you first got started. You want to talk a little bit about that whole evolution?
Well, yeah, and it has and it hasn't. When I went to that writers conference in 2006, what the biggest thing I took away was that I heard every different publisher saying in some way, we are not looking for writers so we can help them build a platform. We are looking for writers who have a platform and of course, the great writing as well. And so I took that home in my heart. And I honestly took about 6 months to say, is this where I want to put my time, my money, my energy? And after 6 months, I decided, yes, I do. I think I took a stab at blogging, but blogging was not for me. And eventually what worked best for me, kind of a typical introvert writer, and that was writing for magazines. So in a year, I pitched over 300 articles, and it doesn't mean 300 different pitches. Not, if I would get one back, I'd tweak it, send it to the next place. And at the end of that year, what I could do in my book proposal was show them that I had written for Today's Christian Woman, for Mops Magazine. So that communicated to a publisher that I was reaching audiences. That's what they have to see. So I've never been a person with the huge blog following, podcast, not even huge social media numbers, but kind of the way that I've done is I want to capitalize on other people's platforms, these magazines who already have lots of readers. That is how it has worked for me. But yes, it is so important. And in my work as editor consultant, I see good writing and strong ideas, and it breaks my heart to have to tell writers that you may not get a yes from a publisher because of this platform business. And I do see some writers who hear that and they say, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to wait 6 months or 12 months to send this to a publisher until I can build my platform. And I just think that's so smart because it matters so much. So lots of different ways to do it. And yeah, it matters so much.
How do you find, that you juggle all of this, whether it's platform or editing or ghostwriting or writing your own books or all the different things that you've talked about.
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
Yeah. And, I get that not everybody is wired for the juggling. When I was in seminary, I had a supervisor for my field education who said, Margot, you are going to be most satisfied when you have a lot of different things going. And she was so right. I had no idea at that time I was a writer. She was so right. And so for me to be able to work on 3 or 4 different projects in a day or a week, feels very life-giving. People have asked me, working at home, are you tempted by laundry or dishes? The answer is no. Never once have I been tempted to do laundry or wash the dishes because I work at home. But so part of it, I think, is I'm just wired that way. And I am a mama. And so the last few years when my little birdies are all flying the nest, 2 in college, 1 about to be in college, I did cut down my speaking a little bit. And I'm ready to ramp it back up again. So yeah, I feel like every writer is juggling their things. And for me, thankfully, that's life-giving. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it is one of those, entrepreneurial skills that I think is very important in this space.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So you've given a lot of advice for new writers, but kind of stepping back, to take a macro level view of all of this, what do you want to pass along in terms of the most important points?
Yeah. I have 3 things. The last one's a real biggie, so hang in there for the last one. But one, when you think about building your platform, I want you to do it in a way that makes sense for you. And that's kind of what I was narrating, that blogging wasn't the thing for me. Podcasts did not exist when I started. But I want to encourage writers, especially if you're that kind of typical introvert writer, I want to encourage you to find a way to build your platform that makes the most sense for who you are. If you're really charismatic and love making shorty videos that people like to watch, do that. And if you just want to be behind the monitor wiggling your fingers on a keyboard, go that route. So I want you to build your platform in the way that makes the most sense for you, because it has to be something that you can sustain. And the second thing, boy, how can it be that I'm just learning this now? The second thing, after I've told you to do what works for you, the second thing is that it is not about you. I was just talking, and that's, your writing is not about you. If you've written a memoir, it is ultimately not about you. It's about the reader, no matter what you're writing. So I talked to somebody recently who's really savvy about selling products and services on her website, right? We all have to make a living. She's really savvy about it. And I was learning a ton from her. And she said, Margot, I haven't looked at your website, but she said, is it about you? Are you kidding? It is 100% about me. It's me bragging about every accomplishment I've ever had so that a publisher will look at it and say, let's hire Margot. But as soon as she asked the question, I understood what she was saying. And that is, why on earth would a reader spend time at my website, engage with what I'm doing if it's about me? It has to be about the reader. So when I look at her Pinterest boards, when I go to her website, everything is about the felt needs of the reader. If you need this, I can help you in this way. If this is something you're struggling with, watch this video. And it's just this complete inversion. And it's so good. It is all about the reader. So on every page, every paragraph, every sentence that you're writing, be serving the reader. I think that's the big win. And then, since you're wondering what that last big thing was, this is something that nobody ever told me. And that is, invest in yourself as a writer. I mentioned I went to that first writers conference kind of as a reader. And then the second one, I got a scholarship to, yay. But because I saw the value, I continued to put my own time and money into opportunities like those, which, I mean, it's lost work, it's travel, it's the cost of the conference, but I want to say that it is so worth it. So whether you hire an editor to help you really nail your book proposal, or whether you invest in going to a conference, that is going to want to help you. That is what will help you get to where you're going. So I know that it takes sacrifice, but I do want to encourage you to think about what it will mean for you to invest in yourself as a writer. That's the thought, Brian. That's it.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, those are all, I couldn't agree with you more on all those fronts. And just to back up the second one a moment, I recently rebranded my own personal consulting business.
Yeah.
It used to be called Enliven Your Tribe.
Okay.
The whole idea meaning of, kind of growing your platform, enlivening your following, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to move away from using the word tribe, but also I wanted to get across what is the absolute most important thing in all of this, which is your second point, who are you trying to serve? So that's my new URL, whoareyouTryingToServe.com.
Oh.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And then the second question that goes after that is, and how are you trying to help them?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you trying to serve and how are you trying to help them, right? So for me, this applies to every aspect of business, not just writing books.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that kind of customer focused perspective to start with, you're going to go off the rails, right? I mean,
yeah. And I think it's a temptation, and writers can do this sort of humble thing where we're like, oh, I don't want to promote myself. I don't want to be always talking about myself. And gosh, about a decade ago, I heard Donald Miller speaking, and he said, like, if you've got this thing, of course you want to share it with people. And so it's not that you're sharing yourself, but you're naming the ways that you can help them. And that is worth, I mean, yeah, if you're not willing to share that and to serve them and help them, then why are you doing the thing? But Brian, now I'm so curious why you wanted to get away from the word tribe.
Well, primarily because of the Native American stigma associated with that word.
Come on.
There are some folks that just are offended by that. And I didn't originally think of it that way. I thought of that word because of the Seth Godin book, Tribes.
Yeah.
Where he has a whole book that's titled that, where he talks about, building a following.
Yeah.
So that was my initial reason for choosing that term. But, I've just heard enough negative feedback from Native American, Indigenous American folks about the use of that term.
Yeah.
And so the combination of that and, my own evolution and learning about, trying to, in everything I do, put serving the customer first.
Yeah.
And good results will follow, right? I mean, so those were the two reasons why I did that.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you listened, right? Because we don't know until we know. But I'm glad that once you knew, you readjusted.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, why not? Why put something out there that may offend someone? I mean, none of us can avoid that 100%. I'm sure I've done plenty of other things that have pissed somebody off or whatever. I try not to, but, it's hard. It's impossible to avoid that 100%. But if you can make a choice that helps in that regard, and in this case, bolsters my belief in serving customers, then, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
So anyway, Margot, I want to thank you so much for your time together. I want to say value per minute, I think, of this webinar was incredible. And I'm going to tell people that. So I hope that, there'll be a lot of folks that can take advantage of it, from here on. So thank you so much.
Good. Thank you, friends. Good to be with you.